This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system quietly discovering it no longer works. For decades, we built our future on an assumption so stable it stopped being questioned. That certain relationships were automatic. That certain resources would always be there. That proximity meant reliability. And then, very suddenly, a single answer exposed how thin that assumption had become. Not a threat, not an ultimatum, just a refusal. What makes this dangerous is not what was said, it's what was revealed. Because in that moment, a critical dependency surfaced, one that touches energy, technology, security, and your daily life in ways that are not yet visible on the surface. Most people will hear about this as a disagreement. That framing is comforting. It is also wrong. If you stay with me, you'll see why this wasn't a diplomatic moment. It was a stress test, and the system blinked. If you care about how power actually works, not how it's described, keep watching. And now we have to look at what's really in control. What actually controls this system right now is not leadership. It's not ideology. It's not even alliances. It's dependency that was never stress tested. For years, North America operated on a quiet shortcut. When a critical input became inconvenient to produce at home, we stopped producing it. We replaced capacity with confidence. Confidence that someone nearby would always say yes. That shortcut worked because it never had to answer a hard question. What happens when an ally stops behaving like an extension and starts behaving like a sovereign actor? Power in this system doesn't sit with the loudest voice. It sits with whoever controls the bottleneck everyone else forgot to protect. The system doesn't reward loyalty. It rewards leverage. And leverage only appears when scarcity meets urgency. That's why this moment feels disorienting. Nothing was taken. Nothing was attacked. The system simply encountered resistance where it expected compliance. And when that happened, everything downstream started to wobble. Because once one assumption fails, you start to wonder which others are already failing quietly. And that brings us to the shift most people didn't notice while it was happening. The most dangerous changes don't arrive with announcements. They arrive as habits. Years ago, this system looked very different. Critical materials were treated like insurance. Expensive, redundant, boring, but safe. Over time, that posture softened. Producing at home was labeled inefficient. Stockpiling was called unnecessary. Alliances became substitutes for infrastructure. And nothing broke, so the change felt harmless. Slowly, the system rewired itself around speed and cost instead of resilience. Inputs became global. Supply chains stretched. Risk was exported. What changed wasn't policy. It was posture. The quiet assumption became this: as long as relationships feel friendly, leverage doesn't matter. But leverage doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It accumulates. It waits. And when conditions tighten, when timelines compress, when demand spikes, when alternatives vanish, that buried leverage surfaces all at once, by then, it's too late to rebuild what was dismantled. You don't restart lost capacity on demand. You don't manufacture trust overnight. This shift didn't announce itself. It normalized itself. And the first visible crack tells us something unsettling. The system didn't fail suddenly. It drifted there. And then it was tested. The shock didn't come as a confrontation. It came as a request. No threats, no public spectacle, just a quiet outreach that assumed alignment was still intact. That assumption mattered because the request wasn't symbolic. It was practical. It was time sensitive. And it exposed how little room for error the system actually had. When the answer came back, it didn't create the crisis. It revealed it. Within hours, the implications started rippling outward. Not in headlines. In briefing rooms, in emergency calls, in conversations that don't usually leak. The concern wasn't offense. It was contingency. Because once a critical input becomes uncertain, every plan that depended on it starts to wobble at once. Timelines slip, budgets stretch, fallback options evaporate. If this feels abstract, stay with me. What looks like a diplomatic pause is about to show up somewhere very specific. The important part isn't who said no. It's how many systems were quietly built on the assumption they never would. And now that assumption is gone. What matters next is how the system actually functions when it's under pressure. This system doesn't break where you can see it. It breaks at the handoff points. Upstream decisions look clean. Downstream consequences look sudden. In between, there's a narrow corridor where leverage lives. That corridor is infrastructure, not the visible kind. The unglamorous layers that turn raw inputs into usable power, permits, processing capacity, long-term commitments that lock supply in place years before anyone notices. Here's the mechanism most people miss. Once production collapses domestically, access becomes conditional. Conditional on pricing, on timing, on behavior. The party that controls the resource absorbs none of the urgency. The party that needs it absorbs all of it. That asymmetry is the entire game. When timelines compress, the buyer loses choice first, then leverage, then stability. What looks like a simple refusal is actually the system enforcing its real rules. No hostility required, no escalation needed, and once this mechanism activates, it doesn't stay contained. It cascades because now every dependent system has to compete for the same shrinking margin, and the pace is about to accelerate. The compression happens quickly. Plans that looked solid last month stop lining up. Contracts hesitate. Approvals stall. Everyone waits for clarity that doesn't come. Markets notice before governments do. They always do. Prices move first, then expectations, then behavior. Buyers rush to secure what they assumed would remain available. Sellers slow down. They don't need to hurry anymore. Every delay compounds the next one. Projects slip quarters, not weeks. Costs don't rise evenly. They spike. This is where the system starts cannibalizing itself. One sector's contingency becomes another sector's shortage. One workaround becomes someone else's bottleneck. There's no announcement when this phase begins, just a tightening. People still talk as if the issue is temporary, as if normal will reassert itself. But systems don't reset under pressure. They reveal their real shape, and once acceleration starts, it doesn't wait for consensus. It outruns it. This is where it stops being theoretical. This is where it reaches you. You don't see the dependency fail. You feel it. It shows up as higher monthly costs that don't come with explanations, as delays that ripple through jobs, projects, and paychecks, as decisions made above you that quietly narrow your options. When base systems tighten, flexibility disappears first. Businesses stop expanding. Then they stop hiring. Then they start cutting. You're told it's temporary. You're told it's unrelated. But it's the same pressure working its way downward. If this kind of slow, invisible cause and effect matters to you, this is the moment to stay engaged. Because once consequences reach households, the decisions that created them are already locked in. What's unsettling isn't that this happened, it's that it happened without a vote, without a debate, without most people realizing the risk existed at all. And now it's no longer confined to one country. It's spreading outward. Once a dependency is exposed, everyone recalculates. Not out of panic, out of prudence. Other governments don't ask who's right. They ask who's reliable. They ask who can deliver without drama, without delay, without conditions that might change overnight. Supply starts flowing toward predictability. That shift doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't require statements. It happens quietly through contracts that lock in years of future behavior. What was once a local assumption becomes a global variable. Allies hedge. Competitors watch closely. Markets price in the possibility that yesterday's guarantees are no longer guaranteed. And the system adapts in ways that are hard to reverse. Once alternatives are built, they don't disappear. Once trust shifts, it doesn't snap back. This is the moment when what looked like leverage starts looking like isolation. Not intentional, not dramatic, just the math of risk management playing out at scale. And now the future paths begin to separate. None of them are comfortable. From here, the system has three ways forward. The first is adjustment, quiet concessions, repaired tone, agreements rebuilt just enough to restore flow. This path stabilizes the surface, but it leaves the underlying dependency intact. It works until the next test. The second path is erosion. No rupture, no headlines, just gradual decoupling. Alternatives deepen, commitments thin out. The system keeps functioning, but with less trust, more friction, higher costs. Power diffuses, coordination weakens. The third path is rupture. Not a single break, but a series of hardening decisions. Access becomes politicized. Supply locks in elsewhere. Domestic capacity tries to restart, but too late to catch up. This path doesn't announce itself either. You only recognize it once. Reversal is no longer possible. None of these paths are chosen deliberately. They emerge from incentives, reactions, and timing. And the most dangerous thing about this moment is that every actor believes they still have time. History suggests they rarely do. What makes this moment difficult isn't that the system failed. It's that it's still pretending it hasn't. Everything is being framed as temporary, as negotiable, as something that can be walked back with the right call, the right deal, the right tone. But systems don't respond to intent. They respond to structure. And the structure that was exposed here hasn't changed yet. Assumptions were made. Capacity was surrendered. Leverage migrated quietly out of reach. Those facts don't reverse because people wish them to. There is no guarantee the next test will look like this one. It may arrive through energy, through technology, through security, or through something we aren't watching closely enough yet. If you want to understand power before it becomes visible in crisis form, this is the time to stay connected. Not for reassurance, for awareness, because the most dangerous failures are the ones that feel manageable right up until they aren't. This wasn't an ending. It was a signal, and the system is still under load,